Listeners, it's time for another episode of I Hate Real Estate. Are you ready to get started today?
Sure.
How's your day been?
It's good. It's been long.
Well, it's getting longer because I've still got you here in the office.
No,
It's late. Let's just put it that way. But we're going to talk about something local today, which we've never done before, so I'm pretty excited. Real estate does obviously encompass everybody's community, but we don't typically get to talk about issues that are going on right here in Little Rock, but today we do. So we are going to talk about, basically, there's a public meeting set up next week related to some development that's going on in our city and some opposition to that development. And as I started to look through the posts I saw and the things that are kind of out there in the public about it, it made me kind of curious as to like what happens in these situations. And I'm sure you've taken part in lots of city meetings and stuff like that, right?
I don't know that I've taken part in that many of them, but I'm aware of them happening and going on, and we get approached about stuff like that all the time.
And when you're dealing with like realtors, brokers, developers, and consumers, people are going to come to you and be frustrated about what other people are doing with their property pretty often, right? And then you have to determine like who has the right to do what.
Correct. It happened out at the golf course we play at all the time. The people wanted to develop some property that's like right in the middle of the course and had been there for years. And there was a lot of opposition from the course, and it ended up getting passed, and they've like cleared the land. It's a really weird spot.
Is it?
Yeah, it's in between. Comically, it's in between like a treatment plant and the driving range of the golf course.
Interesting.
Let's go live there.
Well, I mean, sounds like they're definitely going to have some recreational abilities anyways.
Correct.
Yeah, that's
some
gonna be
good views from either side.
Right. Well, and speaking of good views from either side, what's interesting about situations like this is that no one's really wrong. It's technically just hey, this is what I want to do, and hey, I don't want you to do that. And that happens all the time in real estate. I mean, to be fair, as an agent, I had a lot of negotiation standpoint where the other side didn't want to do what this side did. And that's kind of where situations like this pop up, and we can talk about it in a constructive way and kind of see both sides. And so where I want to start about this basically is that the group that is opposed to the development that we're speaking of out in sort of the West Little Rock area is opposed to it for the reason that they don't want a wastewater treatment plant put in their like neighborhood or in their area. And they're concerned about the effects that that's going to have, like if they smell it or if they're dealing with it. And they're also concerned about additional homes and properties coming into the area where they feel like they sort of have this quaint little quiet community. And so I understand that. And I think if you move out to the country and you want to have a very peaceful sort of environment, that's great, but you don't really get to control the land around you or the people that own it, right? I mean, how many times have you had people come to you about encroachment or adverse possession or something related to their neighbor doing something with their property that they're unhappy about? And oftentimes, like, what happens in those situations?
I mean, you get people that build fences down the middle of roads to stop them from getting access and all kinds of stuff. I mean, people do things that aren't even remotely within the law or within their rights to protect property interests that they think they have a right to protect when they don't.
So we're going to talk about the bundle of rights, which is a fun little term. It's kind of like an external obsolescence term. It's a fun term in real estate that describes something differently than you might think. When you think of a bundle of rights, for me, my head goes to a bundle of sticks, and each stick is a right. And there are 5 rights associated, which is the right of possession, the right of control, the right of exclusion, the right of enjoyment, and the right of disposition. So in this particular scenario, my gut feeling tells me that the right of enjoyment is what feels like it's been violated on the side that doesn't want this water waste treatment plant to go in because they want to have that quaint, quiet country sort of vibe. But a wastewater treatment plant is necessary for the development of any significantly sized subdivision, which is what the subdivision is, I think 100 or 150 homes. And so for me, as soon as I read that, I'm thinking like, okay, well, even though they feel like their right of enjoyment is being violated, at the end of the day, the right of possession sort of trumps that, you know what I mean? And even though they're together, it's private property ownership. And like, what right do I have to tell you what to do with your property?
But their right of enjoyment is the same. There's not a difference in we like country living, we like how it feels out here versus a developer's right of enjoyment of profiting off of developing a subdivision.
Right. But
the right of enjoyment is not just hey, I really love where I live. It's also the right of enjoyment of profits, funds, income, creation, building, developing. All that stuff.
Changing the landscape of an area.
That's right.
And so let's talk about real quick before we even started recording. Actually, you mentioned that I-430 used to be blackberry patches. Is that right?
It did. And now
not in our day. We're obviously younger than that.
No, that's what my law partner has told that story before, where Interstate 430 is they used to ride their bikes and they couldn't go beyond that because it was nothing but blackberry patches. You couldn't even walk in it.
So
so now look at West Little Rock. People don't even think about they think about Interstate 430 as being in the middle of the city, basically, of West Little Rock.
Which is totally like for right now too. There's a ton of eminent domain that has happened over the past several years. We have a ton of highway widening and situations that that you have personally dealt with, I'm sure, that have to do with eminent domain and people getting into situations and arguments about what the highway department is doing and what the expansion is going to do with the effect to their property value.
Well, and something like, I think it was a statistic I heard a few years ago, something like 80% of cities that are in active development and growth are all moving to the west and northwest.
Why?
Isn't it interesting? I don't know. But if you think about it from the standpoint of cities that have grown in Arkansas, look at Little Rock. You can be at the Capitol in Little Rock, and it takes you, 30 minutes before you leave any development driving west? What happens if you go east? 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Yeah. You get into North Little Rock down past the airport. Mm-hmm. You're 10 minutes and you're in Scott and you're back in the country. Look at Conway, just north of here. You get off at Highway 64 in Conway and you turn left. You go into downtown through all the new development, shopping areas, everything. You can go all the way up to the north and west of there, and it's all fully developed, new houses, golf courses. You drive east 5 minutes and you do pass a new shopping center they've built there, but another couple minutes and you're out by where the expo center is that's there, and you're in the middle of the country.
But what blows my mind...
I don't know why cities develop that way, but that's been the tendency unless you're landlocked from one side. It throughout the United States, if it's available to be developed to the west and north, that's where the development goes.
Well, and
it's very strange.
Who knows why, but at the same time, when you mention that, it also makes me think about the fact that that is sort of how Central Arkansas is set up. No matter where you are, if you drive a few minutes in any direction, you will end up with an excess of land. And what I've seen with this particular developer and other developers in the area is what they normally do is they set themselves out a little bit further away from the constant development, like the downtown and the big subdivisions. They're going to go a little bit further than that. And when they start developing a neighborhood and they give people the option to live in that kind of environment, then of course development does follow, because you have more families and then you have a need for schools and you need more infrastructure, and there's all these opportunities that come along with the development of property. But this is like a normal thing that happens when a city grows, and Little Rock's in a growth phase. I mean, every area of Little Rock is growing, and we're also one of those places in the country right now. And if you don't know this, pay close attention. We have one of the lowest median home prices in the United States. But one thing I can say personally is that that's not always true in the West Little Rock area. In West Little Rock, the prices are significantly higher than in a lot of areas of the city. I mean, would you agree?
Yes.
And so with respect to that, I feel
that's because it has a status.
It does have a bit of a status, but the other part is right now, especially with the inflation and everything that's going on, it costs more to build a house. And so you're not seeing the price point of a starter home at $125,000 and $150,000 or $175,000 even. You're not seeing those pop up like you used to, because you can't build a house for that right now. I mean, right now, what you can build a house that's probably 1,600 to 1,800 square feet, 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-car garage, you're probably going to have to be at $225,000 to turn any sort of profit on that. And so when you have a developer that's coming in saying, hey, I want to do normal sized homes at a decent price range as close as I can get it down to this area where teachers and police and firemen and single moms can go out and buy property, there has to be a product to match that. And we're already in an inventory crisis. So if you want to live in West Little Rock,
you got to pay a premium.
And there should be options for every different person at every different price point in every different community. And you should be able to pick a neighborhood and buy a house and have that accessibility. But, just in my personal opinion, there is no way that somebody like me could go over and live in West Little Rock unless there was a price point that matched my ability to provide for my family in that area.
We talked about this when we griped at Dave Chappelle about his fighting fair housing.
Dave, if you're listening, I'm still mad at you.
When you listen. Yeah. But same kind of thing. I mean, it's the availability. You've got to have all kinds of different housing available.
I mean, even Miranda Lambert said it takes all kinds of kinds.
Yeah. I don't like country music.
Oh, boo. Okay. Well, you should.
Arkansas person that doesn't like country music.
That doesn't make any sense to me, but you're also an Arkansas person who's a big golf fan, which is kind of out of character as well.
Never been hunting. Don't like country music.
You've never been hunting? Mm-hmm. That does throw me off a little bit.
I fish.
Okay, well, speaking of fish, though, and the country and all that stuff, environmental compliance is a piece of what has to be done, right? And so when you're developing in an area, what's interesting about this particular scenario that we're referring to is that the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality is the one who permits for things like a wastewater treatment plant. They're the ones who have to go with civil engineers. And I forget who all is involved in this because I'm not technically I don't know how to develop a subdivision myself.
I don't either.
Surprise, surprise. But obviously, a title company cool enough to sponsor a show like this one knows what they're doing. So it's time for you to handle your business and bring your deal to the table at American Abstract Title Company here in Central Arkansas. I'm Jamie Taylor, host of I Hate Real Estate. If you need more information on where to close that deal, click the link below to connect with American Abstract and Title Company. Now, back to the show. I do know that with regard to development, there are lots of steps you have to take. You got to go before a planning commission. You have to go through the environmental quality. You have to get permits from everybody to build and to make sure that you're building
Site
responsibly.
plans, plats, restrictive covenants. You know, a lot of people they always wonder, and I've gotten the question before, why in the world is there a pond in the middle of my subdivision? And, you know, you have to have retention ponds. ADQ and the planning commissions govern a lot of that stuff, so that when you have water runoff where it runs off at a certain pace and it can't go into the sewage system or the water runoff system, your storm drains, the retention pond will hold water at one of the lowest points in the subdivision.
And see, these are things they're all things though that have to be addressed before you ever nail the first board together or pour the first foundation, right? So there's a huge amount of time involved. And I think what a lot of people don't understand,
power, sewer,
lights,
pulling
out trees, paving ground, like there's a whole lot.
Curbs. Curbs have to be cut a certain way. Approvals have to be given.
Hey, speaking of which, do you know why they have a manhole cover that's round on a sewer hole?
So you can fit in it?
See, that's what my answer was, but this was an interview question like years ago, and I think it's a trick question, and the actual answer is because it can't fall in the hole because it's round. But anyway, which is great.
It's true.
But who would think of that? That's not the answer that anybody thinks of. But that being said, when you're going through this process and you're going to your city, have you seen people before through a development go to the city and try to get things done and have an issue with that?
Yes.
Okay.
We've had people go to the city and get approval and build something for a development of a subdivision, and then the city come back out after they did what they said exactly you should do and say, oh, well, this isn't going to work exactly how we thought. You got to do it again on your dime. Here's a $100,000 bill.
Yeah. And then here's some legal fees and some meeting time that we all have to spend doing it. And I think that's where a lot of people miss the point on the development side. And I think for me, I hate real estate was created out of hatred for the industry because, like we talked about, we don't hate real estate as the concept, but when things like this happen, it creates a lot of issues for everybody involved. Obviously on one side you have a group of people who are very frustrated and don't want things to go a certain way for whatever reason they feel strongly about it. But you also have somebody who's actually tied to dollars that are tied to this land. And it's like, for me, I guess the reason that I feel strongly about this associated with the rights piece of it is that I don't think anybody should be able to tell me, especially according to the U.S. Constitution, what my rights are with my property. My property should be able to be developed and done whatever I want to do with it. I should be able to do with it. And it doesn't matter how you feel about it because that's how it works. You know what I mean? Like, at least that's my feeling about this particular situation.
Yeah. When we talked before the show and I told you the U.S. Constitution, you laughed at me. And then I said it again, the U.S. Constitution. It's serious. That's what it is.
Okay, guys.
You can read any article. Articles interpret the Constitution better than someone reading the Constitution because it's written, like I told you, in Old English, and it's very difficult in some respects to understand. But basically, that's what freedom is. Under the Constitution is if you have a piece of property, you have the right to do whatever you want to with that property and on that property, as long as you're within the bounds of any laws or regulations governing that property.
And that's where I think too that is like,
so if you want to build a sewer treatment plant somewhere, and there are laws regulating how you are to build that sewer treatment plant, and you comply with all of those laws, there's no reason why you can't.
That's okay. And the other part of that is that the neighbors and the people that are involved around that neighborhood who have the ability to foresee, okay, this is going to happen and we're not happy with it, they do get the right to express their opinion. But at the end of the day, really, that's their disruption of the other person
as well, though. That's the right. You have the right to speak up. You have the right to say what you want to. In an administrative, a legal proceeding, you can say things that are defamatory about another person as long as they're reasonably related to what's going on in that proceeding, and you can't be prosecuted for that. You literally have more right to free speech in a public, legal, or administrative setting than you do in any other places.
But what blows my mind about this whole scenario is that if you take that time and all of that and you start all the arguing and you go back and forth and you go back and forth, what you end up with, and one of the reasons why I really love this platform is that civil discourse is the thing that has sort of gone to the wayside over the last few years. And you'll have arguments happen. I like how he's so like, duh, I'm an attorney. But the civil discourse that's missing.
Not even the attorney side of it.
Just humanity.
Yes.
And that's the thing is people don't talk through problems anymore. It becomes like, this is how I feel and I will not see your side.
Yes.
And then the other side says, well, this is how I feel. I'm not going to see your side.
People don't like each other anymore.
No, and what's the reason for that? Like, here's where we are. We're a city that has so much potential, it's ridiculous. But we at multiple areas throughout the state have a tendency to hold back development that can be very effective and and adds to our community. We cannot expect the city and the state and all these things to change and get some sort of national great reputation and people to start moving here and wanting to be part of our community and be enveloped in it if we don't have the kind of communication as a city to deal with each other on a human level. And so one of the reasons why I want to talk about this on the show in particular is that I've never actually gotten into a situation where I've made public comments on something that's going on with a development. Sure, I do the podcast, but I don't normally go unless I'm doing expert testimony and make my comments on something. But this is the first time that I feel inclined to do so, because I think what's important is that someone brings some civil discourse to the situation that is disinterested. I mean, I don't have ownership of anybody's property. I'm not friends with people on both sides. I'm just a real estate professional who has enough experience in this arena that when I look at this, I see both sides of it and I understand everybody's side, but the rights to property ownership trump everything in this situation, in my opinion, because I will do what I want to do with my property as long as I have followed the rules, that I know when I'm doing something that's legally permissible and it's productive for me and it's good for the community and other people have an access point in an area of the city that they haven't had before. You can't be a police officer, fireman, teacher, professional, retired veteran, whatever. You can't be any of those things and live in West Little Rock on a single income unless there's homes that are created in that price point, and currently it doesn't exist. So I think that's the reason why I want to get involved in this one and kind of have some commentary on it, because there are two sides to this story. You can see both of them, but you can still arrive at a civil understanding that one another, you still have to meet the needs of the community.
I don't know how far you want me to go on this, but I've just recently gotten involved in the situation and become aware of the situation. And when you look at it, I'm all about the environment. I'm all about human rights, all about property rights, all those things. I'm all about it. I'm not a political person, but from a political standpoint, you look at our Constitution that you have freedom and liberty. You can do what you want to do. But at the same time, there's got to be some kind of governing regulations. There's got to be some kind of laws out there that allow you to do so, that don't harm in a way that allows you to have your freedom but not harm other people. And so when you look at it, those laws and rules have been set. We have 2 centuries worth of laws, rules. We do.
The reason I get cracked up about this, and I got cracked up before the show, is I was like, hold on, let me look on the Arkansas State Constitution about this. And Kendall's like, it's in the regular Constitution.
The regular, yeah. But, it's almost 2.5 centuries worth now of law. And, there's people out there trying to tear it apart and everything else. But that's the job of some people, is to say, hey, this was wrong. You can't do this. You can't restrict us in this way. And there's people that can do that. But that being said, this whole particular circumstance started off with, I'm not going to point any names or anything, but with a small group of people saying, we don't want a sewage treatment plant because it's going to smell bad.
Which technically that's not.
Which is not even true.
No.
My grandparents had a lake house up in Fairfield Bay, Arkansas for 20 plus years. I went up there, I can't tell you how many weekends out of the year, and 200 yards to the east was a sewage plant that's up there, and never one time. I rode my bike up next to it, and never one time did you smell anything. And this is at a lake. This is at a national park it's 100 feet from a lake. It's 200 yards from the subdivision, nothing. So whether or not it smells, that's been one of the reasons why we don't want it. We also live in a town, this is what they say, we live in a town that has 400-something people, I think 700-something people. They don't want their town size to double because they like the feeling of what it's like to live in the country. My favorite one was that we have a new Dollar General store in town that won't be able to stay stocked if they build this subdivision.
You're going to have more than a Dollar General if it's subdivision, either
and
way.
So you look at those reasons, and the whole thing of the petition and all these letters getting written started because of that comment. Well, when they realized, hey, those are selfish comments. Those are things that aren't human issues. I can get a bigger backing on this if I convert, if I flip-flop and I say, let's make it political. Let's hit some of these hot button issues. Mm-hmm. And so now it's, well, this developer, when he did another subdivision over the course of 11 years, there's been 8 violations. Well, they don't say what the violations are. They don't say if some plug came undone for 2 minutes and they had to self-report and that was the violation. There's nothing out there about that. There are no statements out there about how that developer has impacted this area that they claim is now under siege if this sewage treatment plant and subdivision go in. So it's turned into I said it before the show, it's not literally, but let's save the whales, let's save the environment, the green, let's save the trees, the swamps, the fish, all the stuff that's out there. And that's never been the purpose. And so now they've realized what we have is we've got a selfish issue where we don't want personal change, but we're going to make it into a larger community issue that will attract political sides on both sides, blue and red. Blue environment, red doesn't care, going at each other, so that we have more of an impact on how many people will come and show up and support or deny and put pressure on a government entity that regulates this stuff.
Which is crazy only because the government entity that's in charge of taking care of this already has rules and guidelines in place, and that's why public comments are able to be heard, and that's why the whole situation goes the way it is.
To me, it makes it even worse, though. It's worse that you took a selfish issue. They took a selfish issue. They got really organized with their selfish issue, and somebody somewhere said, hey, if we propose this as we don't like the smell and we don't want more people, we're going to lose this. Let's convert it to something that actually directly impacts government officials that might be elected or in positions where they don't want to make half the people mad or 30% of the people mad. Let's put pressure on in a different way. And they do so selfishly, and they end up harming somebody else, their family, families that could potentially live in a subdivision, all over their own selfish wants that they've converted into something else. And then, not only that, they get state senators to write letters about the environment and why it's bad for the environment, and saying these people are really good people, they care for the environment, and everything that they've said is true. And it's just, I don't understand it. I don't understand where it comes from. You can support your community, but to say that it's not selfish, that the only reason we're doing this is to protect the swamp, it's just wrong.
Well, and
there's proof that it's wrong.
And the thing is, the reason that gets me about that particularly too is it's what I come back to when I talk about the right to enjoy your property, is that like, if you don't want to be somewhere that somebody can develop around you, then you either have to like build yourself some privacy, buy the property, get yourself a first right of refusal. I mean, that's something else. If you're going to go into a situation, and if you don't know about this as a property owner, let's say you want to go and buy a property and you have the feelings that these people have, and you're like, I just don't want anyone to develop around me. I want to be able to protect my privacy and be in an area forever that no one can ever touch. Well, then you get first right of refusal from that person that sells you the land and say, look, if you're ever going to sell this next door, I want first dibs, or I want to know, instead of waiting until after the fact and being like, hey, we didn't know. Well, you never know what people are going to do in your backyard.
Lots of people will sell you a right of first refusal. You know why?
Because
free money.
Yeah.
It is literally free money. You can offer $500, $1,000. You can negotiate it. It's free money. All it means is that one day when you list that property for sale and you get an offer on that property at fair market value, whatever that offer is, you have to show it to the other people and they have to match it.
Yep.
And if they match it, you have to sell it to them.
But they get the first right to refuse it, is the main thing.
And then if they don't want to match it, then you can sell it to whoever you want to.
And so for me, it comes down to like, if you didn't know that up front and you didn't know that it was possible, that's one thing. But secondly, where you talk about the selfishness of it, like that's what kind of gets me, is that like, and it's one of those things that I get a little bit nervous talking about, because I've never done that. Like, I don't want to isolate people either. I want people to understand and have more information about real estate. Like, this has been my entire life. For 18 years, all I've done is look at real estate from a value standpoint and its economic impact. And I've helped people buy homes and sell homes and buy apartments and sell apartments and really engage in this and build their real estate career. And of all the things I've ever seen and done in real estate, what hurts me the most about what this is that it puts people like me on the list of, I don't want those people living in my neighborhood. I don't want those poor people to have their tiny house next to my giant mansion and my, you know what I mean? Like, and just plain as day facts for me, it makes me feel like, okay, well, you don't get to have access to my community because you're just not good enough. You can't afford it. And so I like it when a developer goes in and does a smaller level of a home. And I think too, if you drive around in the area, like, this is in the county, okay? So there's not any sort of zoning regulations related
there's
to
no building codes.
Oh, you can put whatever. You can have a manufactured home on one lot, and then you have a mansion on the next one and a horse farm down the street. And it's like, there is no regulation on that. So what happens when somebody decides they want to put a hoarder's paradise across the street from you and park all their crappy cars on it? No one's going to do anything about that. So wouldn't you rather have people who are working their butt off every day to have the simple enjoyment of a nice home out in an area where they can enjoy views too? I mean, I think that's what gets me about the selfishness of it, is that this really is about not wanting a price point.
You know, you talk about that. There's a Facebook post that started all this. I hate Facebook.
Yeah,
but there's a Facebook post that started all this.
You never get on Facebook either. I tag you in every single I hate real estate thing, and periodically I'll see your little bubble. Kendall viewed your story, but
that's my wife.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie.
So And when you look at it, they talk about how this is their little piece of heaven in the Facebook post. And you go, well, why are you trying to prevent someone else, fireman, police, teacher, single mom, from having that also in this area that you love so much?
The thing is, it's going to get developed. It's going to get developed anyway.
Your entire Facebook post that's like this long on Facebook, this wide, this long. Everybody knows
on an iPhone, it takes a scroll or two.
Yes, it takes several scrolls on an iPhone. And there's not one mention of the environment in there. But the link and the page that you go to now, where there's all this organization and hundreds of letters written to ADEQ, has like brown water pouring out of a pipe into a pond.
Not what's happening.
And it's just the total flip is what I'm talking about, is that it's just...
It's not about what it's...
It's not right to impact someone else's constitutional right to enjoy their property, develop their property, do good for the economy, the society, the culture in the state, the culture of West Little Rock, the culture of the rural areas of the county, which is where this is. And to try to prevent them from doing so is not right.
Right. And let's just for a second, if you don't know how this works, this is how it works. Let's say that you are a developer and you want to build a subdivision, okay? You have to go to the city first, okay, and spend a lot of money before you get to the city, developing the plat, getting the land lay, showing where the lots are going to be, developing the floor plan, getting the site plan, making sure the sewage works, all the roads, all the clearing, all that stuff. So you're doing all this.
Water runoff.
All of this is staff, it's money,
You got to make sure fire trucks, ambulances can get in there.
E911 services are available. What about broadband? Can we get Wi-Fi? Blah, blah, blah. So you go through all of that. And then when you have a nice, perfect, bundled up plan, then you go to the city and you say, hey, I want to build this subdivision and I need permits to do it. And then they'll poke holes in it and they'll say, boop, 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 I need you to do this, 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 and this. And then the developer goes back and they do all those things. And then they come back to the city and they get the permission. So they're already going through a whole set of barriers and a whole set of regulation. And these people have been put in place to determine that effective and responsible development is done within the city, state, wherever your municipality is. That's all laid out for you to do before you ever get into a situation where you're issued a permit. So we're already in this phase, okay? We're already in the permitting phase. And then the argument of the permit comes down to personal opinion.
The people who are mad about this elected the people into office that hired the people that are making these decisions. And then you get mad.
So the problem is that that's the thing is the problem is, and nobody's mad at anybody here. Kendall and I are both here's the deal. We got to look at this from a real estate standpoint because that's what this show is about. Okay. When it comes down to the U.S. Constitution and the Arkansas Constitution and
there are property rights in the Arkansas Constitution.
I know. I found them before we talked about the real Constitution, but it's one of those things that as a real estate professional, I wholeheartedly believe in the right to property ownership. The access and the availability that you have as a property owner is totally different than when you're a resident of a city that doesn't own property. And when you're paying taxes on property and you're part of a community and you're trying to ingrain yourself in the home ownership and the lifestyle of a homeowner, you should be allowed to do that. And it takes a lot of work to get to a point in your life where you can buy a home and enjoy a home. I know this. And I think from personal experience, that's what gets me about arguments like this is we already have something in place. The barriers have been whatever. You've gone over the hurdles is what I'm saying. You've gotten to the point where you're at the finish line. Now let's start building, but we've got to stop and deal with all of these opinions first. And I think that's where civil discourse has sort of lost its way. I imagine we're going to go to this meeting and see a lot of things that are maybe not as good or kind as I'd like to see them, but it's going to be one of those situations where people really are going to have to, on both sides, they're going to have to see and realize that this is a continuing thing. It's going to keep happening. Developers are going to develop in our city, whether it's somebody local or somebody out of state. And what's important as residents, as people who are concerned about our community, is to make sure that they are doing the things that are required of them. It's not really our job to do that. If you're a planning commissioner, that's your job. If you're an ADEQ member, that's your job. If you're if you're a wastewater specialist, that's your job. But if you're a resident of a town and you just live somewhere, it's not your job to determine what other people do with their property. It just isn't. Unless you want to pay the taxes on it, then you can own it.
And you can adversely possess it.
Yeah, for 7 years though. It's going to take some time. So I would say, for me, the bundle of rights, when I look at those 5 things, the thing that I think is violated the most is just the right of possession, because he has the right to possess the property and they are basically stopping him from having possession of the property because it's tied up in all of this, not even litigation, but argumentative, conversation related to whether or not this is an appropriate addition to the community. And I would just like to enter for the record here, though, that septic tanks are not the greatest thing in the whole wide world. Okay. And so let's say that there was like a middle of the road, what if it was okay to put estate homes out there on big 3 or 4 or 5 acre lots? Like maybe that would be more appropriate for the people who are upset about it. First of all, that doesn't address the price point issue. Secondly, it's not the development plans that were created by the developer who has the right to do what he wants with his property. But third, like septic tanks are not a great thing to have. They still lose some stuff into the ground that ends up going into the rivers and streams around. I mean, and that's not treated. That's not treated anything. So it's like if you're going to deal with septic tanks versus a water waste treatment plant, in my opinion anyways, I would rather have a treatment plant and have, real sewage going on there than I would have septic tanks in everybody's yard. That's a lot. It's expensive. And also, but also like from a lot standpoint, if you have a small lot, you build a small house. You don't build like huge 3 acre parcels with 1,800 square foot homes on them. Mm-mm. But the price point of a first time home buyer and the size of a first time home buyer isn't available on a 3 acre parcel. It's just not.
It'd be a waste for a developer to build a house on that.
It would be, at this point, it would be a waste for a developer to try to build anything like that because the price point, unless you're going high end, it's very difficult to build lower to moderate income housing. With inflation and with costs and with supply chain issues, it's almost impossible. And
you
so
could
the
build
fact
like
that
a 1,800 to 2,000 square foot house on a 1 acre lot and have some extra land out in the country or whatever it is. But
yeah, which I've seen done too. But the thing that gets me about this whole particular situation is that an access point in West Little Rock doesn't exist for that price point. There just isn't one. I mean, you've got new construction going on out there. There's some homes and stuff that you could, resells, but there's really not anything under $350,000 that you can just go out and buy. And I think this not only addresses some of the inventory crisis, but like I said, I go back to that price point every time is you're in a situation where people can't afford to buy a house right now. They can't. And so if you even have a developer that's interested in developing that price point, like embrace that, because otherwise who knows what you're going to get. I mean, at some point there could be a high rise out there and no one's going to be able to stop it. No. So I just think it's interesting because you look at West Little Rock now and you look at it 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'm sure there's a lot of people who were not happy about the eminent domain that came through and pulled Cantrell it's Cantrell when you go across the bridge still. That was a huge street widening situation. And a lot of that's happening downtown too. There's been a lot of widening because of these roads, which is a sign of growth in a community, which is great. But B, like, those people had a lot of loss involved with that. Some of them had to be paid for their property and then move on. Some of them lost something that they'll never get back. Maybe that was where their family grew up. I know. But it reminds me of when we talk about that, it reminds me of those exact situations. You cannot control what other people do with their property. And even when eminent domain comes in, the homeowner still has a right to deal with the city and talk about what's going on. Civil discourse comes into play in every single area of this.
Yep.
Those were fun times for you, huh? Eminent domain.
It's the Fifth Amendment.
It's the 5th. Also, the 14th talks about this.
Yeah, in a different way. But the Fifth Amendment says the government can't take your property from you without paying you for it. And
they can't just come in and just take your property.
A lot of people associate the Fifth Amendment with what? I take the Fifth.
I take the Fifth.
That you have the right not to incriminate yourself. But the other part of the Fifth Amendment says that the government can't take your property without paying you for it.
But the thing is, people sometimes don't want their land to be taken. And sometimes the government has to pay a lot more money for land to get people to play along with their plans. And that's okay. That's okay, because sometimes communities have to grow and roads have to expand. And trust me, I grew up in a family that moved probably 15, 18 times before I was 16 years old. Okay, home ownership is not in my legacy. I will be the first person in my family in this generation to own a home because none of my brothers own homes. None of them do. And that's, some people might be ashamed of those kind of things. I'm not. I've busted my ass to get where I'm at. And I want to be able to go and buy a property that's in my name and in an area that I'm happy to live. And I can't do that in Central Arkansas if I want to go to West Little Rock. I have to go somewhere else. And I'm kind of a Dogtown girl anyway, so I'm going to stay where I'm at. But what I'm saying is the right to be able to buy a home out there and the ability should be present. And if you don't understand how that feels to come out of the opportunity, never having known what home ownership looks like in the generation above you, and then having the opportunity and having people come in and try to take that off the table and say, no, not in my neighborhood, that's hurtful, just no matter how you slice it. So I'm hurt.
But we don't want to mess up that person's view from her back porch.
Oh, I mean, it'd be hard to drink your coffee looking at all those Poor people down there enjoying their tiny homes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's kind of laughable in that way. When you say it like that, it makes me laugh because it's just not, this has nothing to do really, in my opinion, with that.
We don't want the world to change.
You're going to have to. The world is going to change and people are going to keep building property.
Being sarcastic.
I know,
My
but
kids say sarcasted.
He sarcasted me. Yeah. But what got me, yes, you're being sarcastic and I'm a little, I'm kind of revved up about this now just because I feel like this is such an important thing to drive home. And so keep your eyes out because
I wasn't real revved up about it until I read the Facebook post.
I know. Well, it does.
Because when you take the Facebook post, I know it's the beating a dead horse.
Do you want this to hit it harder?
What is it? There's the beating a dead horse gif that's out there, but it's it's one of those. You get the Facebook post, then you get the follow-up website that's completely different. Then you get state senators saying that what they're doing on the protect the environment side is what they've always intended when it never was the intent in the first place. Just all that coming together.
Yeah.
It'll got me fired up. I was just okay with, hey, let's go make our argument. Let's put up our side. We probably get the permit anyways, or the person that wants the permit is probably going to get it anyways. But then when you look at that Facebook post where it's clear that somebody strategized the best way to try to do this to get people fired up, that's just for their own personal gain.
Yeah, and that's the thing is it's not, if you have the money and the ability and the freedom of time to do that, that's great for you, but a lot of us don't have that. A lot of us are sitting there waiting on the opportunity to develop or build so that we have the opportunity to either provide housing to the community or, and this is the other thing is think about how much money is involved in all this. Every day that passes by, you're dealing with more inflation, more supply chain issues, more opportunity. These houses could have been priced differently a long time ago compared to where they're going to be priced when this is over because end of the day, you're dealing with the increase.
Been finished construction even 6 months to a year ago. It's a lot more money in the developer's pocket than it's going to be a year from now when he starts finishing the first.
Well, and the other part of that for me just goes right back to the principles being different because any other developer who deals or any developer, and I don't know, I'm not going to speak for him and I'm not going to speak for other developers, but my guess is that developers who run into projects where they have to hit a wall and hit a wall and hit a wall and deal with all of these things and take on the financial cost of that and they keep pursuing the opportunity to provide housing tells me that you probably want that developer in your neighborhood over a developer who doesn't care and who says, oh, this is going to be hard, I'm out, and then just bails on you because you need a developer in your community that's going to stay for a long time, that's going to care and see that through, and that has the forethought to say, look, we can't just build big, huge, beautiful homes out here. We got to have things for different people because there's plenty of volunteer firemen that live out there and EMS people and teachers and other people who need to have homes in that area. So that's how I feel about that. So thank you for talking about that. This has been a local report. I'm not on the news, but it kind of feels that way when I say it's a local report.
To the news.
No, we're not sending this tape. Well, actually, I have a friend at Fox 16.
There you go.
But
I've got one at Channel 4. So
yeah, and you know what? THV 11 came out to that event this past weekend too. We could call them.
Did they?
But here's the big thing. I just want to be clear about the fact that I hate real estate as a platform where we have had experiences in real estate that make us feel kind of hateful. And a lot of times it has to do with the intentions of somebody, or it'll have the misdoings of somebody. You'll have a seller lie to a buyer about the condition of a property, and then you have to deal with the repercussions of that. And so when you're really into the real estate profession, like you are, like I am, and you see those things from an appraisal standpoint, from a broker standpoint, from an attorney standpoint, from developer. It doesn't matter if you're talking about the HVAC guy. Real estate has a lot of opportunities for people to get hurt and also for people to be very successful. And the idea of this platform is to provide information, obviously entertainment, but information and protect consumers and also give knowledge to people that are in the market that may not have our experience and can't speak to that, because where else are you going to get that kind of information in such a fun, exciting way?
Yeah, I feel like we've done a good job of that so far.
We've done a great job of that. And you know what? If you're watching the show and you think we've done a great job of that, you need to hit subscribe on your YouTube button right now.
Or if you think we have not,
just leave us alone.
Tell us, and we can improve. We can always get better.
You're so much better. He's like, we're going to open it for public comment. I'm like, did we not just talk about
We're going to have public
comments?
comment on the Facebook, or not, oh goodness, not Facebook. It's bad. We're going to have public comments about the podcast talking about public comments.
Yes, if you guys would go ahead and make some public comments, we'll be happy to hold a meeting next week, and we'll hear all of your comments, and then we'll live react.
We'll FaceTime with everybody on a big call.
Also, heads up, Dave Chappelle, if you want to come to this meeting, we're going to be talking about that pesky development of houses that are affordable for the community, and I know that's your favorite thing to talk about.
We can buy him dinner.
Yeah, we can buy you dinner. Of course, he probably doesn't Probably has plenty of spare money since he pulled his $61 million development out. And
We'll still buy him dinner.
yeah, we'll still buy him dinner, but only if he says his stance on that anyways. He never did. So I'm going to Google it and see if he ever did, but I don't think he ever responded.
He didn't.
So make sure you hit subscribe and follow us for more information about real estate and all the things that it entails. Of course, we've talked about it before. We talk about real estate on this show, mostly the negative side, but there's lots of positivity with Kendall and I. So make sure that you keep in the loop of what's going on here. We'll give you an update next week when we record an episode about how this all goes down in our town. Any other comments? Any other public comments?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Well, thanks for another
public comments to you, me, and Roman. It's going to be great.
Yeah, the very best video producer in the whole wide world, Roman.
right.
The very best. So if you haven't subscribed to him, you can also do that on YouTube. Find Director Noodles. He is amazing. So thank you guys for another amazing episode of I Hate Real Estate. Kindle, I'm looking forward to next week. Also enjoy hitting this gavel entirely too much.
Oh, no, you've taken it from me.
You can have it back next week.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. All right, haters. We'll catch you on the next episode of I Hate Real Estate.